January 17th, 1945. Bavaria, Germany. The frozen ground cracks beneath hurried footsteps. The column moves in silence. 43 women, most barely into their 20s, their breath forming clouds in the bitter air. They wear Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms, now torn and mud-caked, the eagle and swastika patches faded to grey ghosts on fraying wool. Their hands, wrapped in cloth strips, clutch nothing, no belongings, no hope, just the cold certainty of what awaits, concrete floors, metal bars, and the hunger that follows defeat. The American trucks idle nearby, engines rumbling like distant thunder. The women do not look at the soldiers. They have been told stories, wild, apocalyptic tales whispered through the ranks during the final months of the war, tales of barbarism, tales of revenge. The Volkssturm officers had painted vivid pictures before they fled, American camps where prisoners froze, where rations were withheld, where German women would pay for their nation's sins in ways too dark to speak aloud. Greta Hartmann, 22 years old, a signals operator from Heidelberg, stares at her boots. The left sole has separated from the leather, flapping with each step. She thinks of her mother's kitchen, the smell of Apfelstrudel on Sunday mornings, the piano in the parlour where her sister practiced Brahms. She thinks these thoughts to keep from thinking of tonight, of tomorrow, of the weeks that will follow in whatever hell the Americans have prepared. The convoy moves west away from the collapsing Eastern Front, away from the Soviet advance that devours everything in its path. The women have heard those stories too, stories that need no embellishment, stories confirmed by the hollow eyes of refugees streaming westward. To surrender to the Americans is to choose the lesser darkness, or so they pray. But this choice was born from a machinery of lies constructed carefully over 12 years of totalitarian control. Since 1933, the Nazi propaganda apparatus had woven a tapestry of fear and superiority, threads of racial doctrine intertwined with warnings of external threats. Goebbels' ministry had painted America as a mongrel nation, weak and decadent, yet simultaneously capable of unspeakable cruelty when roused. The contradiction mattered less than the fear it generated. German women serving in auxiliary roles, signals operators, administrative clerks, anti-aircraft assistants, had been fed a steady diet of these contradictions. America was both inferior and terrifying. Americans were both cowardly and vengeful. The women in this particular column had served at a communications outpost near Regensburg, routing messages, decoding traffic, maintaining the thin threads of coordination as the Wehrmacht fractured. They had not fired weapons, they had not stood in the killing fields of the Eastern Front, but they had enabled those who did, and, in the brutal arithmetic of war's end, that distinction meant nothing. When the American Third Army swept through Bavaria in the campaign's final weeks, these women became prisoners of war, a classification the Geneva Convention barely contemplated for female auxiliaries. The International Red Cross would later document over 15,000 German women detained by Allied forces in the war's closing months, most serving in roles that blurred the line between civilian and combatant. International law scrambled to catch up with the reality of total war. As the trucks roll through the checkpoint gates, Greta glimpses the camp through the canvas flap. Her breath catches. The expectation had been razor wire and watchtowers, searchlights cutting through darkness, the architecture of imprisonment. Instead, wooden barracks with smoke rising from chimneys. Electric lights glowing warm behind glass windows. An American flag moving lazily in the cold wind, its stars and stripes impossibly bright against the grey January sky. The truck stop. An American officer, captain's bars on his collar, clipboard in his gloved hands, stands waiting. He is young, perhaps 30, with a Kansas accent that will become familiar in the days ahead. He does not shout, he does not sneer. He reads names from the roster, checking them against his list, his voice steady and bureaucratic. This administrative calmness is its own kind of shock. Inside, he says in careful, practiced German, "You will be processed, you will be fed, you will be assigned quarters." The women move in their column, still silent, still braced for the moment when the facade drops. Greta's heart hammers against her ribs. The building they enter is warm, genuinely, impossibly warm. Steam radiators tick and hiss along the walls. The air smells of coffee and something else, something she cannot immediately identify because it has been so long. Fresh bread. They are led to a processing area where female U.S. Army nurses conduct medical examinations. The nurses are efficient but not cruel. They check for lice, for disease, for signs of injury. One nurse, seeing the frostbite on Greta's fingers, bandages them without comment. Another hands her a bar of soap, not the synthetic ersatz soap Germany had been producing for years, but real soap that smells of lavender. It is in these small moments that the first cracks appear in the edifice of expectation. The women are divided into groups and led to their quarters. Greta's group of 8 is assigned to Barracks C, room 4. The door opens onto a space roughly 20 feet square. 8 metal frame beds line the walls, 4 to each side, but these are not the bare metal slats they had imagined. Each bed has a mattress, not straw-filled canvas, but an actual stuffed mattress. Each has 2 wool blankets, military issue, but clean and whole. Each has a pillow. Greta stands in the doorway, unable to process what she sees. Behind her, another woman, Elsa, a former typist from Stuttgart, makes a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. "There must be a mistake," someone whispers. But there is no mistake. An American corporal, a young woman with red hair tucked under her service cap, stands in the doorway. "These are your bunks," she says in adequate German. "Dinner is at 1800 hours in the mess hall. Tomorrow you'll receive work assignments, light duties, nothing strenuous." She pauses, seeing their stunned faces. "There are showers at the end of the hall, hot water available between 16 and 2000 hours. Hot water. The words seem to come from another universe. When the corporal leaves, the 8 women stand frozen in their tableau of disbelief. Then slowly Greta moves to the nearest bed. She touches the blanket. Her fingers, clumsy in their bandages, trace the weave of the wool. It is real. It is there. She sits, and the mattress compresses beneath her weight with a softness that feels like a memory from childhood. Else sits on the bed opposite, and suddenly she is weeping, not sobbing but silent tears that track through the grime on her cheeks. Another woman joins her, then another, until 5 of the 8 are crying, not from fear, not from relief exactly, but from the cognitive dissonance of mercy when they had braced for punishment. Greta does not cry, not yet. She is still waiting for the revelation, the moment when this kindness will be revealed as prologue to something darker. She has been trained through years of propaganda and months of war to distrust surfaces. Kindness must be manipulation. Comfort must be a trap. But the trap does not spring. The days that follow establish a routine that corrodes expectation through sheer, grinding consistency. Wake at 700 hours. Breakfast, real breakfast, with oatmeal and powdered eggs and the bitter coffee Americans seem to drink by the gallon. Work assignments follow. Laundry duty, kitchen assistance, administrative tasks. The work is not brutal. The guards are not cruel. The American soldiers treat them with a distant professionalism that is more unsettling than hatred would be. Greta is assigned to the camp library, organizing and cataloging books. The library itself is a revelation. Hundreds of volumes in German, confiscated from local towns, now available to prisoners. She finds volumes of Goethe, of Schiller, of Heinrich Heine, the Jewish poet whose works had been burned, in 1933. She holds a volume of Heine's poetry and realizes she is holding something that in her own country would have been destroyed. The cognitive dissonance grows. At night, in their barracks room, the women talk in whispers. They compare experiences, trying to construct a framework that makes sense. Else worked in the camp hospital, assisting American medics. She watched them treat German prisoners and American soldiers with the same medications, the same care. "They used penicillin on a prisoner yesterday," she whispers. "Penicillin on one of us." Penicillin was the miracle drug, the wonder medicine Germany had heard about but never mastered. To use it on enemy prisoners seemed an incomprehensible waste, unless the framework itself was wrong. Unless the ideology that had shaped their understanding was built on sand. The food becomes a daily referendum on everything they had been told. Meals are not lavish, but they are consistent and adequate. Meat appears 3 times a week, actual meat, not the mystery protein of Wehrmacht rations. There is butter, not margarine. There is white bread, not the sawdust extended black bread of the final war years. And there is waste, shocking, visible waste. Americans throw away food. Greta watches soldiers scrape half-eaten meals into trash bins and feels something fundamental shift in her understanding of the world. This is not the desperate efficiency of a nation on the brink. This is abundance, so casual it doesn't recognize itself as abundance. 3 weeks into her captivity, Greta receives a care package. The American Red Cross has been distributing them to prisoners, small boxes containing soap, toothpaste, a comb, and chocolate. Chocolate. She holds the brown bar, wrapped in waxed paper, stamped with English words she cannot fully read. She thinks of the last time she tasted chocolate, before the war, in a cafe in Heidelberg, before the world broke. She breaks off a square and places it on her tongue. The sweetness is so intense, she almost gasps. She had forgotten this flavor, this sensation. She had forgotten that life could contain such small, pointless pleasures. That night she weeps into her pillow, finally, privately weeping, not from sorrow, but from the weight of understanding. Everything had been a lie, not the facts of the war, not the dates and battles, but the framework. The ideology that had structured her world since adolescence, the narrative that had told her who she was and what the world contained, had been a fiction, and the proof was not in grand political statements or philosophical arguments, but in chocolate and mattresses and hot water. The records of that winter are meticulous, preserved in the archives of the U.S. Army's Civil Affairs Division. Camp 17B near Augsburg held 412 German female prisoners of war between January and August 1945. Medical reports show a 93% recovery rate from malnutrition among the prisoners within 6 weeks of internment. Disciplinary reports are nearly non-existent. 2 incidents of contraband tobacco, 1 altercation between prisoners, no incidents of violence involving guards. The camp commander, Colonel James Hartford of the 3rd Army Civil Affairs, kept detailed notes on the psychological state of the prisoners. In a letter to his wife in March 1945, he wrote, "The German women arrive expecting brutality and receive bureaucracy. They expect punishment and receive indifference. This seems to break something in them more thoroughly than harshness ever could. Yesterday, one of them asked me why we feed them so well. I told her, it's what the Geneva Convention requires. She stared at me as if I'd spoken in tongues." The convention, that dry catalogue of rules and requirements, had become a more effective weapon than propaganda could ever be. It demonstrated through 10,000 small actions that American power was constrained by law, that even enemies had rights, that the individual had worth separate from the state. Greta's transformation is not sudden. It is geological, the slow shifting of tectonic plates. She begins with small doubts, questions she asks only in the privacy of her own thoughts. If Americans are the barbarians, why do they follow rules? If Germany is superior, why is it Germany that starved and froze while America shipped excess across an ocean? If the Führer was infallible, why did infallibility end in this? In April, the war ends. The news comes over the camp's public address system. Hitler is dead, Berlin has fallen, Germany surrenders unconditionally. The women gather in the common room, listening to the American announcer's words. Some cry, some sit in stunned silence. Greta feels nothing, or rather, she feels the absence of feeling, a vast emptiness where certainty used to live. The weeks that follow bring a new routine, preparation for repatriation. The women will be screened, their wartime activities examined. Those cleared of major war crimes will be released, sent back into a Germany that no longer exists as they knew it. The Reich that promised 1,000 years lasted 12. The nation they served is now divided, occupied, its cities shattered, its ideology discredited. Greta is interviewed by an American intelligence officer, a patient man who speaks excellent German, and asks questions about her work, her beliefs, her understanding. He does not accuse, he excavates carefully, looking for signs of fanaticism or complicity in specific crimes. She tells him the truth, that she routed messages, that she believed what she was told, that she never questioned because questioning was dangerous and unpatriotic and unthinkable. "And now?" he asks. "What do you believe now?" She considers the question, this impossible question. "I don't know," she says finally. "I know what I don't believe anymore." He nods, writes something in his notes. That's a start. In June, Greta is cleared for release. She stands at the camp gate with her discharge papers and a small bag containing her few possessions, the clothes she arrived in, now clean and mended, the bar of lavender soap, and a book from the camp library that the commandant allowed her to keep, Heinrich Heine's collected poems. The Germany she steps back into is unrecognizable. Augsburg is a skeleton, walls standing without roofs, rubble-choked streets, the smell of dust and decay. Refugees crowd the roads, displaced persons camps mushroom in the countryside, and the occupation forces patrol with a watchful authority. She makes her way back to Heidelberg, a journey of 2 weeks on foot and in overcrowded trains. She finds her family's apartment building half destroyed, but her mother and sister are alive, surviving in 2 rooms of what was once a 6-room home. The reunion is tearful and complicated. They ask about the camp, about the Americans, and she struggles to explain. "They had so much," she says, finally. Not just food and medicine, but the idea that they could spare these things, that there was enough to share even with enemies. We were told America was weak, materialistic, decadent. But their materialism looked like generosity. Their decadence looked like abundance. And their weakness, we called it weakness, but it was restraint. They could have starved us, beaten us, and they didn't. Not because they couldn't, but because their law said they shouldn't. Her mother, a woman who had joined the Nazi Party in 1937 because it was practical, who had raised her daughters to salute the flag and trust the Führer, sits with her hands folded in her lap. "We believed such beautiful lies," she says softly. The years that follow are years of reconstruction of cities, of politics, of the soul. Greta finds work as a translator for the American occupation forces, using her English and her hard-won understanding of American thinking. She watches as the Marshall Plan pours money into German recovery, watches as the same nation that bombed Dresden now helps rebuild it. The generosity is strategic, she understands that, a bulwark against Soviet expansion, a tool of Cold War policy. But strategy does not erase the material fact of the aid, the food shipments, the loans, the investments. She thinks often of that first night in the camp, of the bed with its mattress and pillow, of the moment when mercy revealed itself, not as weakness, but as strength. The warmth of those blankets had been more subversive than any propaganda leaflet, more powerful than any interrogation. Decades later, in interviews conducted for the German Federal Archives Oral History Project, Greta Hartmann, by then Greta Kessler, grandmother, retired civil servant, spoke of her experience. "We expected to be treated as we had been taught to treat others," she said. The revelation was not that Americans were kind. Kindness can be individual, personal. The revelation was that their system required kindness, their law demanded it. They could be individually cruel, I'm sure some were, but the structure constrained them. That was what we had never understood. In Germany, the system encouraged cruelty and individuals had to be brave, to be kind. In America, the system encouraged kindness and individuals had to work, to be cruel. That difference, that structural difference, explained everything. Her testimony is preserved on tape, her aged voice steady, choosing words carefully. The warm bed was not just a bed, it was an argument. It said, "You are a human being, even in defeat, even as a prisoner, even as an enemy. You have worth. And if you have worth, then perhaps the ideology that told you otherwise was wrong about everything." The symbol, in the end, was simple, the blanket. Not a weapon, not a slogan, but a wool blanket issued to every prisoner, regulation weight, olive drab, stamped with US Army in black ink. A blanket that promised warmth without demanding loyalty, that provided comfort without requiring conversion. In the architecture of the totalitarian state, every gift demands something in return: obedience, gratitude, subordination. But the blanket asked for nothing. It was there because the regulation said it should be there, because the system made space for mercy even when the heart did not. Thousands of German women passed through American POW camps in 1945. Most returned to a shattered homeland and rebuilt their lives in the ruins. Some married American soldiers and emigrated. Some joined the Communist Party in the Soviet zone and found new certainties to replace old ones. But most simply lived married, raised children, worked, endured, and tried to make sense of the rupture between the world they were promised and the world they received. The warm beds did not erase the war. They did not undo the camps, the murders, the cities reduced to ash. They did not absolve or forgive. But they offered a glimpse of an alternative architecture, a system built on different foundations. And in that glimpse, in the space between expectation and reality, something cracked open. Not redemption, that would take generations if it ever came at all, but possibility, the possibility that the lies had been lies, that the truth might be found elsewhere, that a different kind of world might exist beyond the ruins. January 1945, Bavaria, the frozen ground, the column of women, the cold certainty of punishment, and instead warmth, not as propaganda, not as manipulation, but as policy. The banality of mercy administered with the same bureaucratic efficiency that had once administered horror. The revelation that abundance is its own argument, that systems shape souls, that even a blanket can be revolutionary when it arrives without strings, without demands, without the need for anything but the simple acknowledgement that cold people deserve warmth. This was the lesson written in woolen wood, in hot water and white bread, in the thousand small mercies of a system that treated law as binding even when the enemy was defeated. The lesson that democracy is not just ideals but infrastructure, not just freedom but mattresses, not just rhetoric but the casual waste of a nation that produces so much it can afford to share. The women wept because they finally understood. The cruelty they expected would have confirmed everything they believed. The mercy they received destroyed it all. And in that destruction, the slow, painful work of reconstruction of self, of nation, of understanding could finally, tentatively begin.